G'day, I'm Bruce and today I'm here to do a video on this rare railway section car. The story goes with this machine, Queensland Rail used to own it. It was based in Rockhampton, which is about 4 hours north of here. So they had an auction, they had this one and about 4 others, and they were auctioned off somewhere in the 90s. I'm not quite sure whether it was early 90s or late 90s. But anyway, that's how the story goes. And this fellow lived on a property out in southwestern Queensland. And he must have retired and moved to the coast about 10 years ago. And he took this little fella with him and it just sat in his shed for quite some time. As far as I'm aware, it sat for about 10 years, hadn't been run for about 10 years. Then it was started briefly, and then the bloke I know, he bought it and put it on a trailer and bought it here. We're just going to give it a once over today, just to check everything over, like engine oil, brakes, battery, clutch, any of that sort of thing, just to see whether it all looks like it's still free and will still work and be working safely. It's going to get some sort of restoration because it looks like it might be going to go back into some sort of a heritage type situation. It's probably going to have some safety inspection before it goes back on the tracks. So I'll probably give it some sort of an inspection myself just to check everything over that I know about, to give it its best chance to go back on the rails again. Righto, I'm in the cockpit now, and obviously here's the choke, start, ignition, light, alternator, stop. I don't know what that one is. That one would have to be the throttle. I'm guessing this one here would be the brake. This one over here is probably the transmission. This probably has something to do with the way the clutch works, or I guess it's probably reversed this way and forward that way. So I guess I'll probably just lift this panel up. The engine should be sitting up in that part. So we'll just have to pull this out and have a look at what's sitting underneath there. I don't know when these were built, but originally they had Fairmont engines in them. They had these two-stroke Fairmont engines in them and they were really noisy. I can remember they'd have them idling and they'd be going bang, bang, bang. And then the fellow would open the throttle up, and then as they were accelerating they'd go bang, 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 bang. They sounded like they had about a 4-inch piston in them. They really made a loud noise. I don't know what sort of muffler system they had on, but anyway, this one's been converted. It looks like it's got an industrial 11 horsepower Briggs cast iron bore type motor in it. There's a picture there of the 11 horsepower Briggs & Stratton industrial engine with electric start. Driven back through this tooth belt here, pretty heavy looking belt on there. Back to this granite state transmission. I guess that's probably a forward and reverse on that lever. And it's also got a chain drive. When it comes out of that drive, comes out of the transmission, it's got this big chain down here which drives back onto the back axle. There's a close-up of the plate on the transmission there, where you can see where it was built. If you look down there, you can see the alternator and the exhaust system coming out the back. Looks like a Bosch alternator on there off a car. You can also see it's got the fuel tank back here and it's got its horn here. The fuel tank is designed so you fill the fuel tank from the back of the machine. There's the filler over there for the fuel tank. I see it's got twin horns on here. That's probably a safety idea, so if one doesn't work, the other one probably will. You can see up here it's got a rotating beacon here. I'd say it probably would have had some sort of a wireless aerial on here. The wiring there looks fairly well complete. Looks like one of them there's unplugged, but this machine actually had the roof raised up. Apparently it must have been quite a tall gentleman that drove it, so you can see they've added this to make it higher. Somewhere back here, I guess it's been lifted too. Maybe they just lifted it up a bit higher than what. Oh yeah, they've added in here. I suppose if you're 7 foot tall or something, maybe the joker was smacking his head when he hopped in and out. When I worked in the railways in the 70s and early 80s, I used to see these a fair bit when I was on the loco, and that would be going along and the driver would say, "There's a track examiner." He'd be just in the pull-off off the side. You know, just say the main line's running along there, at right angles to the main line, they'd have this pull-off with a couple of rails coming out, and there'd be one of these sitting there with a gentleman waiting for the train to go past. Different people call these different things. Some people call them quads because they had 4 wheels on them. Other people call them the road runner, because the track examiner would run along and he would check the rails, check everything was okay, whether, overnight, whether there's no kinks in the rail or anything like that. So I suppose I don't know what they call them today, but anyway, a lot of people called it the bloke that either this machine or the bloke. I'm not sure which one they were referring to, but they'd say, "Oh, there's the road runner. The road runner's off on a pull off up there," And of course we'd blow the whistle and he'd probably give us a wave to say everything's right, he's off the track. And we'd just go past the train, then I suppose he'd get back on and he'd either go on behind us or he'd be going the other way. But when they decided to give up on these, they went to Suzuki four-wheel drive, Suzuki Sierras. And what they did, they just had an axle, the same as the axle under here, on the front of the Suzuki and on the back. And they just had a ram, and they'd drive the Suzuki on the tracks, and they'd lower down the steel wheels on the front, lower down the steel wheels on the back. They'd make it so the Suzuki was getting enough grip on the rails, and instead of having one of these, they'd be in a Suzuki. And then after they decided to do away with the Suzukis, or maybe they couldn't get Suzukis anymore, I don't know what the full story was, then they went to Land Cruiser Utes, and they did the same sort of thing, but what they did, they put dual wheels on the Land Cruiser. I don't know whether they narrowed the diff down or not, but they had dual wheels on the back, and the inner wheels would touch the rails, and they'd drive along like that. Same thing with the steel wheels, an axle like that on the front, and the same thing on the back with the hydraulics. They just lower them down, and away they'd go. They had this idea where you could lift the handles back here, pull these handles back, and that made it easier for them to lift the thing up. To lift it around, just say it was on the main line there, they'd pick it up, and they'd pull it around, and they'd put the back end on the pull-off, then they'd go back the other way then. So the idea with the handles like that was to give them more leverage. No, that one's jammed, but you can see how the idea worked. But then I suppose with health and safety, then they probably thought, oh, this is too heavy for a man. That's probably when they moved from that to Suzuki's. The idea is to apply the brakes. Obviously you have this back that way, and that's with the brakes off, and then you can bring it up here to increase your braking. And you clip that in there, that's probably enough on flat ground. But then if you have to really whack the brakes on, I suppose you move it up into that, which would really lock the brakes on if you did that. And if you look underneath here, you'll be able to see how the brake blocks work on the wheels. If you look down here, you'll see the little tiny brake blocks and that on the wheels, and when I release the brakes, you can see how that's working. Similar idea, look at that, how easy the thing runs along on concrete. Certainly runs pretty free. When they had the two-stroke Fairmont engine in them, they actually had a radiator here, little radiator, and I think they had the cap up on here to put the water in the radiator, but from memory I don't think they had a fan on them, and they used to reckon they'd get hot if they ran in reverse. And a lot of times they'd come into a station, and the station master, back when they had station masters at most stations, they might run in on the main line, then the station master might swing the points and whatever, and stick them back down the loop or stick them over into a siding if there were a couple of trains going across. And of course the moment they look like reversing, basically no air going through the radiator, and they didn't like that. They'd get real hot real quickly. I think the first thing I might do is dump all the fuel. Apparently there was some sort of an issue when it was started up just for a short time. When it was shifted, there was some issue with the fuel. Then it was just winched onto the trailer, so we might start by dumping that fuel out just to be safe. Looks like it might have had a bit of work done on the fuel lines, and the fuel filter on it looks pretty good, but the fuel in there looks a bit murky, so it's probably be a good idea to drain it out. Yeah, it looks like it's got a little fuel pump down there. That's quite a natty idea. Look how they've rigged that up. They've worked on the pulse off the intake to go down and work that little pulse pump, which acts as a fuel pump. Yeah, the fuel smells a bit stale in the tank. Could probably do with draining out, I'd reckon. It has got that smell about the fuel's gone off sort of thing, or it's very old anyway. Probably not as bad as what was in that Bedford truck, but obviously I reckon I'd dump the fuel anyway. Would be a good way to go. It's even got a pixie little glass bowl under there. And it's got a tap on there too. I might turn that off until I undo the bowl. A lot of these old school things, they had cork gaskets in them. Probably quite a good idea. Yeah, petrol. It's a dirty looking colour. There's this little bowl. It's got a bit of junk laying in the bottom there. Probably a bit of old rust in that from the tank. And then if I turn that tap on, then now it should drain. Very slowly. Cap's undone. Would have thought it would have done a bit better than that. Oh well, we'll let it drain, then we'll try and have a look down inside the tank and see if it's got rust or dirt in there. It's pretty hard to see, but I think there is some sort of muck in the bottom of the tank. While that fuel's draining, I reckon I might drain the engine oil. Get over here in the light. It's not too bad, but you know, it always looks dirty on a white bit of rag than what it does on the stick. Yeah, I reckon I'll drain it. The railway mechanics must have worked pretty hard to fit that engine in and make it so it's easy to change the oil, and you know, quite a lot of thought would have went into putting one of these engines in there. It's a pretty nutty idea the way they've brought the drain out through the front there. I'll just blow a bit of the dirt off. That wasn't too hard. Seeing as I've just loosened a little bit, sometimes that loosens a bit of the dirt up, so let's give that another. While the fuel's draining, the oil may as well be draining. It always looks dirtier when it's running out than what it does on the end of the dipstick as well. I'll just set that on that little ledge there where I can see it. Put that underneath there. Looks fairly thick actually, but who knows how old it is. Could be pretty old. I've got that little dinky light on here. This would have all been made up too. The original Fairmonts. I think the radiator was only down to about here on the Fairmonts. The railway stuff always did have some form of ID number or whatever on it. And I'd say when the railway put it up for auction, they got a bit of cold gal. They just sprayed on the number here, which looks like it must have been 315. 315. It looks like the other enthusiast that got it off the railway at the auction, he must have sanded that back very carefully to see what number was on there. While they're both draining, we might as well pull the spark plug out and have a bit of a look at it. No. That's the one. Let's give this a bit of a blow. I'll get my hacksaw blade to give it a bit of a clean. I've got the spark plug out there now. I'll give it a bit of a clean. If you go back through my old videos, you'll see there's a video done on a Bedford crane truck. Well, that's my friend Robbie. And back years ago, Robbie taught me how to make up a thing for cleaning spark plugs. He was a machinist, and he was a very good machinist, very smart fellow. So he would just get a hacksaw blade and he would put that on the wheel on the grinder and shape it up like that so it's got nice square edges. Just give it a bit of a run on the back there. So you've got square edges to scrape the carbon, and you can get right through with that point. You can get right in there, you can give that a scratch around. Of course, cars burn a lot cleaner today than what they did back then, but you can see how easily they can just take all that carbon off in one foul swoop. And if you've done your job right, you can get in behind there. A lot of these motors like that were set at 25 thou. They used to say the hacksaw blade was at 25 thou. That is pretty close. Maybe it does need widening out a little tiny bit. Probably not quite strong enough to do that, but you look like you're cleaning nothing out, but then when you put it in your hand, you can see there is junk coming out of it. So it definitely does the job. I really need my glasses on to really see, but you know if you can get that right down to the bottom, that it's pretty clean. Might be getting a little bit more out. Yeah, a bit more junk come out, and I'll get compressed air and blow that out too, just so it doesn't go down beside the piston around the rings. This is just another way you can clean up a bit if you've got a bit of brake clean. Let's give it a bit of a spray. You can just get this and run around in there as well. Every bit helps. Most jokers would have probably just chucked this one in the bin and went and bought a new one, but I've always been used to trying to keep things rolling for a bit longer. Let's blow that out of there now. It's looking pretty good there now. This is just a little trick. I've got the spark plug here, and sometimes these spark plugs, especially in alloy cylinder heads, that can pick up. I've only ever had that happen a couple of times out of all the engines I've worked on, petrol engines. So I find that if you just get a little bit of anti-seize, you don't need very much either, just a little tiny bit, because you don't want it coming undone. But at the same time, you can see I've got just the tiniest little bit there. If you just put a little tiny bit of that on there, I've had it where the thread's picked up, where that's grabbed the alloy, and you go to undo it and you think, oh, I'm in trouble now. You think, what do? Do I work it backwards and forwards? Or do I just try and undo it one way? There'll probably be a few people on there leave comments about whether they've had the same sort of problem. It's just one of those things that's very rare to happen. One time I was working on a Range Rover. It happened when I went to pull one of the plugs out. Another time it was on an RB30 Nissan motor, turbocharged motor from the factory. Plug just decided it was just going to pick up. This bit just grabs the alloy thread, and you think, if I keep going, am I going to rip all the thread out the head? So I think if you just have that little tiny bit of anti-seize on there, can't do any harm. If I was out in the paddock or somewhere and I was working on some old bomb, I'd probably just pull a dipstick out and put a drop of oil or something on it. But because we're in a shed here now, we've got the luxury of concrete floors, and we've got this just sitting there, so I just show people what I do. That's another thing and it did feel a bit dry when I went to first undo it. It felt a bit graty. It didn't quite feel as good as it should, I didn't reckon. So I immediately thought of that when I was undoing it. I thought, well, that's pretty dry. That even made it a bit smoother to tighten up. I've got 4 different plug spanners here, but what happens, they'll foul on the air fins. I've got the air fins running up that close to the plug that these are basically too thick in the wall to go down beside the thing and grip on there properly. So that's why if you go back to a tube spanner, it's only thin in the wall, and that can fit down beside there and get a grip on there. They used to use these a lot in the older cars. I can remember I have got a set somewhere at home that my father had, and they were a real rusty old set. But that's what he used to use on his old 1924 Dodge. Got to figure out which end. But you can see it's a lot slimmer in the wall, so it will fit. It will fit on there easily, but not everybody has one of these. It's more of an old-time idea, but you just never know. There's always going to be. I don't like to over-tighten them. Just do them up slowly. Don't jerk them at the end because you might strip the thread. The short reach ones like that, more danger with them than the long reach ones. The long reach ones have obviously got twice the thread, twice the grip, so these will strip a lot quicker than the other ones. Put the lead back on there. Yep, it's on there now. Sometimes with these too, there's another thing you can do here too while we're talking about spark plugs and covers. You've got to watch out. Some situations too, you'll have a problem where the wire, you'll have that much trouble getting the wire off that you can run the risk of pulling the wire out of the connector. So if you do this trick, if you have a screwdriver and you just get underneath there, just take your time. And if you can just get underneath that edge, you've got your hand over on this side, get your screwdriver coming under from that side, and just pull him off easy like that. That's a little trick that's worth remembering too. Because sometimes they can get stuck on there pretty tight. I'm just going to put this drain bung back in and we'll put some oil back in the engine. Need a bit of rag. If I keep clean, the spanners will keep clean. I'd say it's got thread tape on it already. That's probably about it. It's going to give this funnel a bit of a clean. And find the cleanest bit of rag here. Yep, looks clean. This won't quite fit. Yep, looks nice and clean. Rightio, now the oil. We've got our genuine Briggs & Stratton oil. Probably going to be pretty slow at pouring in, I reckon. I might just do it the easy way. It seems a bit strange, genuine Briggs oil in little containers like this. Most times I buy it in a 4 or 5 litre or 20 litre, but it was a show holiday, so this was all I could get. Give it a bit of a wipe off. Up to about there. I'll just lay this rag up here across it. It's only the cap. I won't pour it all in, I'll just check it. So I don't dribble oil everywhere, I'll just go like this, back into there and into there. But I don't want to spill the oil down on that, don't want to spill oil on that belt. Righto, looks like we're right on the mark. Maybe just a whisker more. Yep, that's exactly right on it. Don't know whether you can see that. Pretty hard to see. It's right on the mark. We don't have to worry about oil filters because it doesn't have an oil filter on this engine. Let's check it again to make sure I'm right. Yeah, it's exactly right. Right, that little job's done. I'll just set that there. This one's still got some in it. The tank is drained out now, the fuel tank, so I'm going to use this vacuum arrangement and just run that around the bottom of the tank and see if I can suck any rubbish off the bottom. Just going to go from this angle now. There's another little trick too, if you really want to get serious, you can cut this off on about a 45. See, I've cut that off on a bit of an angle now, and that'll be able to run along the bottom of the tank a bit better. Next trick will be, I'll get the blow-off gun and I'll blow back up through the tap in case there's any junk just sitting in the tap or in that first little bit. It may even have a little filter in there, I don't know, but we'll make sure that's clean because it was only dribbling out pretty slowly. Just going to give this a bit of a blow up through the centre here. I'll just give the tank one more vac out in case there was any rubbish sitting in that tap. Straighten this up a little bit, make it the right shape. An old bit of hard hose is actually better for doing this than a brand new piece because a brand new piece thinks it's still on the coil. You can see that's about the right angle on there when I'm running that around the bottom of the tank. See on there, that's just about the perfect angle. So that's if you're really fussy and you really want to suck the bottom of the tank clean, always just chop that off with a pair of side cutters. And you can see that's about the angle I'm going in on. So that'll work pretty good. You can see the suction. That's enough to draw any rubbish out. And sometimes too, if you think this is blocked up in the head, you just get your sandblaster. That's all it is. This is just a cheap mini sandblaster. You just block the end off on something like that. It'll blow any rubbish back out through the other end. It has got a little bit more suction than what it had. It'll probably have less suction once this goes on, but I'll just try it again and see. I'll give it another run around in case it did have a bit of dirt up in the head part. Sounds pretty good. Most times if you do that, you'll either hear it spitting here, where it's spitting it out through here, or you'll hear it crackling on the other end there. Or you can hear it change note. If it does block up or does pick any rubbish up, you can tell with your ear that it is actually picking something up. So that's another job done. We just need our glass bowl now put back on. I've got the little glass bowl cleaned up now, nice and spotless. So I just slip that back underneath and put the little gadget around underneath, and you tighten up the thing to hold it on. And I'm going to have to swing that thing over. Swing that thing over if I can do it. Undo it a little bit. It's harder than what it looks. I know what it's got to do. I've just got to try and make it do it. Got to screw up underneath there. It's a good idea too, if you can turn the glass bowl a bit. Sometimes if they've got a bit of a loose spot, that's good. That's where they've been sitting previously. I think that's its loose spot around about there, I think. If it's got a rubber in there, I'll probably be right. If it's got a cork in there, it may leak. That's about as much as I can do with it. Like the fuel line's just been pushed on here, so we should put another clamp on there too, just to be sure. And I've got that tap open at the moment. Yep, that's open. A lot of times you turn them open, then just turn them back a little bit. I've just got that hose off there now. It's a little bit small, so we've got some hose there which will probably fit a bit better. And we'll probably take the filter off up there, and we'll probably put a bigger hose between them. Lucky we changed it. It smells pretty rotten now. We disturbed it all. And you can see here when it runs into here, most of it's gone into the container underneath where we caught it, but just come and have a look in here. Pretty foul looking petrol when you see it looking like that. Well, you can see it's pretty dirty looking. It's got a real stinking smell about it. So you can see that was a job that needed doing pretty badly. With these filters, if ever you have any experience with them and you want to give them a clean out, especially if the shops are shut and you can't buy a new one, and you're going to clean it out, the fuel always comes in this way and goes over top of the filter and out that way. So when you blow it out, you always blow it the opposite way. To be careful, you can probably even reduce the regulator on your compressor back to about 30 psi if you want to. We haven't reduced this one, but I won't go overdoing it. You can hear a bit of rubber here, it crackling a bit. It's pretty well gone now. Yeah, so like you can blow them up if you give them too much pressure in one go. I have had them blow up on me before. The way most filters work is there's more area on the outside to block up than what there is on the inside. So the fuel or whatever comes into here, and there's more room for more dirt to settle on the outside, and it'll still be working better with X amount of dirt on here than what it will be if X amount of dirt comes back the other way. So that's just the way most filters work. With these filters like this too, you'll see there's two different sizes. They're really meant that if you want to put on the bigger hose, you just get a sharp Stanley knife or something, just cut that first bit off and just put a bigger hose on here. But on this particular application, it looks like we're going to go bigger on the hose on the tap, and we're going to put a bigger hose over this part, so we'll probably just cut that other bit off. But this part here, going forward, it looks like we may have to stick to it with a smaller hose from there on. We're in a different shed, so I might call it a day. So this shed's not really decked out with big overhead lights or anything. So I think we'll probably call it a pause on the filming, and I'll come back first thing in the morning and we'll continue on filming from there. Righto, I'm back here early this morning, so the next job's going to be we'll do some more work on the fuel system. I'm going to use a bigger hose on this part here, and I'll have to cut this little tail off the end. If I can get that to come undone. I think I'll just cut it clean off here behind. It's always best to use a Stanley knife or something to cut these off too. If you use a hacksaw blade, you always end up with whiskers wherever you cut it off. If you did have to use a hacksaw blade, on this side it probably wouldn't matter too much because it's going to be filtered. But if you use a hacksaw blade on this side, where it's going to go straight up to the carburetor or whatever it's got on it, whiskers might drop off later on. That could go up and cause the thing to flood or the carburetor to run stupid, play up. So we're going to use a Stanley knife here, if I can just get in there and cut that off. You can see there how nice and clean that is. There's no whiskers on it. I've got the new piece of hose, so I'm just going to cut it to the same length as the old piece. These are quite good if you're not real good at cutting things off square. They're Chinese, they're not very dear. They can break. I've already broken a pair of them. You can see they do a very good job of cutting it off square. The next thing is we'll blow just check this is clear. Looks like it's pretty right. The other way you can do it too, if you're worried about cutting things off square. My old plumber mate Alex told me this many years ago. He used to call everyone Dad, and he said, "Hey Dad," he said, "it's easy enough to do." He said, you just get your piece of hose there, and he said you look down on top when you're cutting, and he said you just imagine there's a right angle bend on either side, and you just have a look there to see if you got your right angle bend on either side, and just keep watching when you're cutting, and he said it'll work out pretty good. I've got a pretty rusty blade here too, but so if you just come and bring the camera here and look down on top, if you can just keep that at the same angle, just look at the inside there, right angles on either side, you'll be pretty right. I still didn't quite get it square, but you can see that's the idea anyways. If you're looking down on the top, try and get a right angle 90-degree bend on either side of your blade onto the hose. You can't go too far wrong. These clamps are pretty sort of graty, they don't feel smooth, so let's put a little bit of lube on there. Still feels a bit graty even with a bit of WD-40 on it. That's heaps tight enough. Rightio, take that back inside. I've got a clamp down here where it didn't have one before. I'm ready to try and push that on there. We've already got a clamp on there. Just come around the other side. Rightio, we've got that on there. I won't tighten it up until I've got the hose on the tap on the other end. Just going to put this other clamp on. I've left the other end loose on purpose so I can actually turn that filter on the hose a bit if I've got to. So I don't think I'll have it leaning that way because it's too close to the chain, so I'll twist that around so it's hopefully going the other direction. Yep. Yep, this looks pretty good. I'll just get my screwdriver with the socket on it. I've got the light there so I can see, but it's only just balancing there, so I'll go steady so I don't knock the light down. Yep, that's heaps. That's about it. Somehow we'll try and should go somewhere along on there. It should be held up. This hose down here was actually too long, and it was putting too much pressure on the angle on the filter over here. This hose was hanging, like the assembly was hanging down. So I've just shortened that hose up now to make it so there's not pressure on that, right on that join there. It looked like it was going to bend down. In time it might have cracked the filter there, so we've just shortened that hose up a bit. That's about how much we cut out of the fuel line, about 40 mil or about 1.5 inches. The fellow that was actually selling the machine, he had told the buyer that the fuel lines and that weren't great. I believe he did change some of the fuel lines, but all that was done in haste. The seller did totally the right thing by the buyer here by telling him that the fuel system will probably need some sort of attention. The buyer was very impressed by the seller and thought the way the transaction was done that he was a thorough gentleman. I think this wire here might be the wire to work the brake light, but it was just zip tied up against the fuel line down the bottom there, so we will just zip tie it back for now. That's with the brake right off there, so we'll just check that that's not going to foul on that lever. Should be pretty right there. I'll just let that off. Yep, everything should be pretty right. The next job will be to fill the tank up with fuel. This is petrol. I know it's in a yellow diesel container, but it's not the end of the world. This one I thought, well, this one already had its spout sitting on there. I thought just in case we need to use the spout, we'll just put the petrol in that one. So I know sometimes I do things back to front, but I guess someone will probably leave a comment about it. I'm just going to put some fuel doctor in the tank. I won't put very much in because it's only a little tank. But if there is any algae or anything growing in the system, this might be enough to. I've only got a little bit in there. It's not very much. Every bit's going to help, I suppose. I haven't pulled the bowl off the carburettor, so this is sort of a cheat's way of going about it. If we got clean fuel, a bit of fuel doctor and clean filter, well, we're working our way along, and the carburettor, the engine might run a bit sick for a while if it's got that old fuel in the bowl on the carburettor. But if it can get past that, everything might run good. Next thing I'll do, I'll just pull the air cleaner off, have a look at it. Looks pretty good. I'll go and give it a blowout anyway, just to check it is clean. When it comes to air cleaners, I made up this nozzle that fitted on this old blow-off gun at right angles. You can't seem to buy them like that for some reason, I don't know, but that's perfect for getting inside there, blowing them out. There's always an argument, some people say, never blow them out from the outside. When I worked on the railway, fitters would get the air cleaners and they would blow them off like this on the outside. They'd always blow down on a bit of an angle. But with the railway equipment, a lot of times it wasn't so much dust, but it was exhaust fumes, like carbon from the smoke and coming out the exhaust would somehow get back onto the air cleaner. So a lot of times when they blew them off, it was just a whole heap of black dust came off them. Sometimes these small engines too, sometimes originally that may have had a sponge around the outside, and there's always an argument about how much oil to put in the sponge. Some people used to use even sewing machine oil. Other people would go up to say about 30 grade. Wash the air cleaner out with soap and water, not petrol. Talking about the foam part that they might have around the outside of that, like a pre-cleaner some people would call it. But anyway, if you wash them out with soap and water, you can't damage the sponge. And then squeeze as much water out as you can. If you've got the time, set them in the sun, let them dry out. If you haven't got the time to wait, even if they've still got a bit of moisture in there, put some oil on them, tease them up, and you'll see the water will come out. The oil will go into the sponge, but the water will come back out. So the best way to go then is just wring them out as much as you can. Try and get as much oil off them as you possibly can. Even if just hold the pressure on them for 30 seconds or whatever till all the oil's gone, or as much oil you can get off it, and that's probably about right. Because if you leave too much oil in there, it's like running with the choke half on. And if you don't have any oil in there, well, a lot of times the dust can get through the sponge and contaminate the main paper element. If you're really fussy too, some of these air cleaners can leak, even on cars. Sometimes they can leak around the ends. You just get some grease. Just go like this, put a run of grease around here. And a run of grease around there. And then if the dust tries to get through there, it won't be able to do it because the grease will just stop it anyway. This is particularly good if you have one of those setups where you've got a chainsaw with a big steel cut-off wheel and you're cutting steel and you want to make sure that the metal shavings are not going to get through either end of the air cleaner. It's a really good idea to do this on machinery like that. Some air cleaners on chainsaws too in the past, different models that I've encountered or my friends have had, you'll see like a track of dust where they can leak through for some reason, probably because the ends haven't been made properly on the air cleaner. I know one time I had about an 84 Corolla just with a standard air cleaner on it, and I could see where it had been leaking. So straight away I put the grease on it just to be sure. Even that doesn't quite look right. Maybe that will lean over. Our wing nut, here it is up here. I'll just go and get the grease. I'll just put a little bit of grease around the wing nut too. That's another place dust can leak past. Feels nice and snug. Right, that's good. I'm just having a bit of a look at that transmission. I reckon we should probably change the oil in that as well. That way we can be sure that it's done. So I'll just give it a bit of a clean around the bung. The right angle to be able to get around underneath there a bit better. I've just got an open ender here, 5/16. That's probably the best thing to tackle those square-headed bungs with. With any transmissions or any of these sort of things, don't take that bung out until you can loosen this bung, because if for some reason you round this bung off or this bung can't... Oh boy, you wouldn't think it was the same person that that dealt with those bungs. Yeah, so you want to always make sure that you undo the filler bung first, because if you drop the oil out and then you can't get the filler bung out, then you can't put the oil back in. You're in big trouble. Now that I've cracked them, I'll just blow a bit more stuff off around them. Just get that job done. I've got the container underneath to catch the oil. It's one of those things, the oil's going to run everywhere. But that's the way it goes. It'll get a bit of rust proofing down there. I thought, being a fairly old-fashioned transmission, I thought it'd probably take 80-90. Then when I had a good look at the plate, no, it takes this 30 automotive transmission fluid, so that'll be the one there for it. While I'm waiting for the transmission oil to drain out properly, I thought we'll change the battery terminals, put some new clamps on the end. Originally it didn't have these boxes on here. They've added them on. I don't know whether they were for extra people to sit on or whether it's just to hide the battery so the battery is away from the driver or whatever. That's a bit of a weird looking arrangement. I suppose it worked okay, but we'll see if we can make them both the same, make it look something. I'll tackle the wing nut one first. Half inch. Just give them an extra little wipe. I can't help myself. I'll give them a quick sand. That way I'll know they'll be as good as they can possibly be. Now all of a sudden they look a bit shinier. I'll just wipe the grit off. We've got these other ones here. Remember, you can always tell by the size. The bigger one will be the positive one always. I will just stick a bit of grease on the bolts. I'll just stick the slightest little bit on that. Won't need much. That's our positive. Probably need a 13 for that. Rightio, that's done. It looks like that one's a 12. Too much grease. Just a smidge on that, won't need much. Right, it's done. All ready for a battery. I've just lifted the big 900 cold cranking amp battery in, which is a bit of an overkill for a little critter like that. Most times we're working on things a lot bigger than this. So I'll just give those terminals a bit of, post a bit of it clean. Looks like the battery doesn't want it to sit right down, so it'll be okay. The old story. Do the positive one up first. I'll have to say it again. See, just so I had the negative one on there now, and I'm working on the positive one, and I come back to here, like that, sparks. Or if I go over to here, bang, sparks. But if you do the earth, and we do the earth last, see, if I would have done the positive last, I could short it. But if we do the earth, and I come over here and hit the body, nothing's going to happen, because that's at earth potential, that's at earth potential, so there'll be no sparks. So it's just something that I probably will mention a few times, might be of some use to somebody. Rightio, we've got that done now. Now transmission is still draining. Looks like it's nearly stopped there now, so I could probably put some more oil in the transmission. As you can see, if I try and fill it from this side, I run the risk of putting oil on the alternator belt. As you can see, if I had to come down here with oil dribbling out the end of it and place that into there, you can see the alternator belt there is going to be in the way, so the alternator belt might get oil, so we don't want to do that. But if I had to do that, this is probably what I'd do. I'd probably get a piece of rag, make it so it's fairly thick, and I'd probably drape that across the belt like that, Could probably do with even another piece putting on top of it because the oil can soak through. And that way, if I had to go that way, I'd have to try and keep that cocked up out the way and go down like that. But rather than take that risk of getting oil on the belt, I'm going to go around the opposite side where there's no belt. And around on this side, you can see no belt, nothing to worry about. And I've actually got that on there. That's a piece of hard plastic. I'm not sure if it's a piece of a shaft off an arrow or something like that. So I heated that up and put that in there. So because I don't think the other hose would have fitted in. Not very well. No. So that's probably going to make it a bit slower to suck the oil up. The cameraman has just put the drain bung back in, which is good. So while I'm getting the syringe ready to put the oil in, right to go, got the trusty syringe. We can just suck that oil up. It's got a breather on top of the gearbox, which is good. There's a little breather up on top here. So as I'm pumping the oil in, the air can come out the top, which is a good idea. A lot of times things will have the breathers up at the high point. As the machinery gets hot, there can be a certain amount of moisture in the oil. But if the breather is at the top, as the machine heats up, it can get rid of the moisture out through the top. Then of course on a cold night, all these sort of things will suck air back in then with moisture. I know one time I had a Ford V8 car and I had a top-loaded gearbox, a wide ratio gearbox, and I put a close ratio gearbox back in. So I pulled the top cover off. And I think I washed it out with diesel to make sure it was clean inside. Anyway, I put this gearbox back in my car. And then I didn't realise, I think it was in first and second gear, it didn't have any detent to like click in and out of gear. That bit, there was just nothing there. So I thought, oh, what have I done? Obviously when I tipped it upside down, I tipped the spring and the detent plunger out. But anyway, while I had the gearbox apart, I thought I'd do the right thing. Top loaders have a bulge on top of the top cover. There's a little bulge about the size of I will say it's probably about an inch from memory, 3/4 of an inch, round and probably only, 6 mil, 1/4 of an inch high. And they just have an open hole in there. And from memory, I think there was a gasket, a full piece gasket that covered everything underneath. So what Ford had done, they had this breather hole at one end, and it was a full gasket, and then I think the gasket had a hole or it was open the other end back further. So if any rubbish fell in, it'd just fall in this gasket, and it'd probably just sit there because it'd be oily. But anyway, what happened, I had to pull my transmission back out. But what I had done, this is the important part of the story, is I thought right underneath that little breather thing, I thought I'll just get some cotton wool and I'll put underneath there. So if any dirt falls down through that hole, the cotton wool will catch it. And I thought, this is a good idea. I'm smarter than Ford, but I wasn't. So anyway, I went to Ford and I bought the detent spring and the plunger, pulled the transmission back out again, pulled the top off where this cover was, where the cotton wool. I couldn't believe it. You ought to see all the white, all the moisture in the oil. The moisture couldn't get out because I put the cotton wool in there. So all of a sudden I thought, I've just shot myself in the foot doing this. Lucky I did lose a detent plunger and spring, because look now, look at all the moisture that would have been trapped in the transmission. So obviously Ford knew all about that and I didn't. So that was another little lesson. I thought I'd be able to just make that so dirt couldn't get in there, but I just had to put it right back the way Ford had it and leave that piece of cotton wool out. There we go now, that's pretty tight in there. I would say that's full. Well, I definitely won't do it up as tight as the last bloke had it. That's probably about right. Righto, we're right to see if it will actually go, see if it will do something. Looks like it's got a bit of a procedure here. Looks like we give it full choke. Then we've got an ignition switch here which gives us a red light. We've got another switch here. That looks like it's a headlight. Righto, ignition on. Then we've got another button over here, which is obviously the horn button. I'm not sure what that does. We'll turn that on anyway. Maybe that's the, well, it looks like that's the stop button there. This must be the start button here, I'm guessing, and the throttle here. Take the brake off. Ready to go. This must be forward. Final job now will be to grease the chain. So I've got this chain lube here. So I'll just spray some of that on the chain and that'll be another little job that's done. I'm just going to get the cameraman to push me along. Well, this has certainly been an unusual but rewarding adventure working on something like this. Pretty well been through from one end to the other with engine oil, gearbox oil, spark plug, brakes, fuel system, battery in there I suppose just to see if it's going to go and whatever, and it does move, the brakes work, so about the only thing that doesn't work on it is the taillight, so it's probably just a matter of rigging up that wire that's been tied up out the way. If any of the viewers have any information on these section cars or road runners, what age they are, or there might be somebody out there that might have even driven one or worked with one, please leave a comment below. Any information that comes forward, I'll pass that on to the owner, and I'd be interested to know myself a bit more about it. I'm happy with its overall condition and the way everything's working, so the next thing, the owner might have to see if he can find some private railway line somewhere and put it on and take it for a spin and see how it goes. It's such an unusual critter that maybe the viewers would like to see me go out and film it when it's running along a track. If that's the case, I'll round up the cameraman and we'll see if we can go and film it. That will be about it for this video, so thanks very much for watching.